Veronica slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table like they were nothing more than a grocery receipt. My hand shook as I reached for the pen, fingers still rough with calluses from the construction site I'd just been kicked off. She didn't look at me. Not really. Her eyes focused somewhere past my shoulder, like I'd already disappeared from her world. I can't carry a man who's drowning, she said, her voice flat and final. No emotion. No hesitation. Just a cold statement of fact. Then she stood up, picked up her designer purse from the counter, and walked toward the door. The sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoed through the empty house. The front door opened, then clicked shut behind her. That sound echoed in my chest louder than any argument we'd ever had in 20-3 years of marriage. I sat there alone at the table we'd picked out together, staring at my signature, drawing on the paper, and realized I'd just signed away 2 decades in under 30 seconds. The pen was still warm in my hand. My name is Henry Dalton. I'm 54 years old, and I used to build homes for a living. Not just any homes, custom builds, estates, properties people dreamed about for years before they could afford them. I founded Dalton Homes when I was 31 with nothing but a truck, a toolbox, and a promise to Veronica that we'd make it together. For 2 decades, we did more than just make it. We had the big house with the view, the vacations to places with names I couldn't pronounce, the respect from everyone in our social circle. Then the economy crashed hard and fast. 1 delayed project turned into 3. 3 turned into 6. Clients pulled out overnight. Banks stopped returning my calls, then stopped answering entirely. I thought my wife would stand beside me through the storm like she'd promised at the altar. I thought love meant something more than a balance sheet and a credit score. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Dead wrong. The auction happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I stood across the street from the house I'd built with my own hands, watching strangers walk through our front door like tourists at an open house. They pointed at the crown molding I'd spent weeks perfecting, the custom cabinets I'd designed myself, the stone fireplace I'd installed stone by stone over 3 weekends. Veronica wasn't there to see it. She'd already moved into her new boyfriend's luxury condo downtown, the one with the doorman and the rooftop pool. The auctioneer's voice carried across the lawn, sharp and businesslike, completely indifferent to what that house meant. Sold to bidder 17 for $420,000. I'd bought the land for $60,000 and put my heart into every corner, every detail, every nail. Now it belonged to someone else who'd never know the story behind those walls. I turned and walked to my truck without looking back. Some things you can't afford to watch die twice. The motel on Highway 9 became home for the next 8 months. $40 a night, thin walls that let me hear every conversation and argument from neighboring rooms, a bathroom that smelled like mildew no matter how much bleach I used. I picked up whatever work I could find, patching roofs in the rain, fixing fences for cash, installing drywall for contractors who used to work for me and now looked at me with pity. The pay was terrible. The hours were brutal and long. At night, I'd lie on the sagging mattress and stare at the water-stained ceiling, listening to trucks rumble past on the highway outside my window. My wedding ring sat on the nightstand beside a stack of bills I couldn't pay, glowing dully in the neon light from the motel sign. I didn't take it off out of sentiment or hope. I just hadn't figured out what to do with it yet. The man who used to build dream homes for wealthy families now didn't have one himself. One night in late winter, I pulled out an old notebook I'd kept in my truck and started sketching. Not a building this time. Not a floor plan or an elevation drawing. A plan for something else. A blueprint for my own life, starting from absolute zero. I couldn't use the name Dalton Homes anymore. The reputation was ruined beyond repair, the debts too heavy to carry forward. So I decided to start over quietly, under a new name, with no flash and no pride and no announcements. Just honest work and nothing else. I sold what was left of my old professional tools to a pawn shop downtown and used the money to buy second-hand equipment from estate sales. A circular saw with a bent guard that still cut true. A drill that sparked sometimes but worked. A level that was still accurate. I registered a new business license under the name HD Restorations. No one needed to know what the initials stood for. That was deliberate. That was the point. My first job came from a Craigslist ad posted at 2 in the morning. A woman named Claire needed help repairing her late father's farmhouse before selling it to settle his estate. The place was falling apart when I got their rotted porch that sagged dangerously, leaking roof with missing shingles, windows that wouldn't close no matter how hard you pulled. I gave her an honest estimate, half what the other contractors quoted, and she hired me on the spot. Without negotiating. It took me 3 weeks working L1 from sunrise to sunset, but when I finished, she cried standing in the kitchen. Not because it was perfect or fancy, but because I'd treated the house with respect like it mattered. She told her sister about me. Her sister told a friend. That friend called me about a kitchen renovation. Slowly, one job at a time, word spread through the community. I started sleeping in my truck between jobs, not because I couldn't afford the motel anymore, but because I didn't want to waste time or gas driving back and forth. Meanwhile, Veronica posted pictures online like her life was a glossy magazine spread designed to make people jealous. Her new boyfriend, Marcus, owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 counties and wore suits that cost more than I used to make in a week. Back when things were good. They went to wine tastings in Napa, beach resorts in the Caribbean, and charity galas where tickets cost $1,000 a plate. In every photo, she smiled wide with a glass of champagne in her hand, looking like she'd finally escaped something suffocating and dark. I didn't follow her social media accounts, but mutual friends made sure I saw the posts anyway. They thought it would hurt me, thought I needed to know what I was missing. Maybe it did hurt at first. But after a while, I started noticing something else in those pictures. The way Marcus's hand never quite reached her waist, always hovering awkwardly. The way her smile looked practiced and tight, like she was performing for an invisible audience. I recognized that look because it was the same one she'd given me toward the end of our marriage. 6 months into rebuilding my business from nothing, one of my old colleagues reached out through a cryptic text message. His name was Troy, and we'd worked together for years. Before everything collapsed. He offered me a deal over drinks at a roadside bar under the table work, no taxes, no paperwork, cash payments that would double what I was making. Legitimately. All I had to do was look the other way on some permit issues and use cheaper materials than the contract specified while charging for the expensive stuff. I met him at a diner instead of the bar and listened to his entire pitch over cold coffee that tasted like motor oil. When he finished talking, I slid a $20 bill across the table for my meal and stood up without saying anything at first. I'm not that desperate, I finally said, looking down at him. He laughed like I'd told a joke. You're living in your truck, Henry. You're cleaning up after other contractors. How is that not desperate? I looked him straight in the eye. Because I can still sleep at night without hating myself. I walked out and never heard from Troy again. 2 years after the divorce papers were signed, HD Restorations had grown into something real. I had a small crew of 3 guys who showed up on time every morning and worked clean, took pride in the details. We specialized in high-end renovations now, the kind of projects where clients cared more about quality and craftsmanship than speed or cutting corners. I kept my face completely out of all the marketing materials. No photos of me on the website, no interviews with local papers, no social media presence at all. Just referrals and word of mouth from satisfied clients. My name stayed off the websites and business cards. I wanted the work to speak for itself, not me. One day in spring, a real estate agent called about a luxury property renovation in Maplewood Heights. I recognized the neighborhood immediately. It was where Veronica and I used to live, where we'd hosted dinner parties and pretended everything was perfect. I took the contract without any hesitation. The house was 4 doors down from where we used to wake up together every morning. I walked through those empty rooms during the estimate and felt nothing but quiet satisfaction. I bought a property 6 months later with cash I'd saved. Not huge, not flashy or impressive. By any means just solid and well built. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors throughout, a backyard with enough space to breathe and think clearly. It sat at the end of a quiet street in the same neighborhood I'd lost everything in, the same place where everyone had watched me fall. I didn't buy it to prove anything to anyone. I bought it simply because I could, because I'd earned it. The first night I stayed there, I walked through every room slowly, listening to the silence and the way my footsteps echoed. It felt heavier than I expected, but cleaner too. Like fresh air after years of breathing smoke. There were no arguments echoing in these walls. No resentment soaked into the carpet, no history of disappointment in every corner. Just empty space waiting to be filled. My space. I sat on the living room floor with a beer and a gas station sandwich and realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel lonely at all. I felt free for the first time in years. The house was mine. The life was mine. And nobody could take it away this time. One afternoon in summer, I was picking up materials from a building supply company I used to work with regularly before the bankruptcy. The guy behind the counter, an older man named Frank who'd been there for decades, squinted at my invoice, then looked up at me, with recognition dawning slowly in his eyes. Dalton, wait, as in Dalton Holmes. Henry Dalton. I paused with my hand on the counter. For a moment, I seriously considered just lying, making up some excuse or saying he had me confused with someone else. Then I just smiled faintly and said, not anymore. That's all gone. He nodded slowly, recognizing something in my face, maybe the weight of starting over from nothing, maybe the quiet pride of surviving something that should have destroyed me completely. Heard you're doing good work now under a different name, he said, processing my payment. Real good work. Better than before, people say. I signed the receipt with my usual quick scrawl. Just trying to build things that last this time. He didn't ask anything else, didn't pry into what had happened. I appreciated that. I loaded the lumber into my truck bed and drove off. The past kept trying to catch up with me, but I wasn't interested in looking back anymore. That version of me was dead and buried. This one was better. While I was slowly rebuilding my entire life from scratch, Veronica's carefully constructed world was crumbling faster than she could patch it together. I didn't hear about it right away. But when the news finally reached me, the details came fast and Brute Al Marcus had left her. Suddenly and without much explanation. Apparently, he'd been seeing someone younger on the side for months, and when Veronica finally confronted him with evidence, he didn't even try to deny it or apologize. He just told her to pack her things and be gone by morning, cold as ice. She'd given up her own apartment when she moved into his place, burned that bridge completely. Now she had nowhere to go and no backup plan. The jewelry he'd bought her, that she'd shown off in all those photos. Fake, cheap costume pieces. The savings account she thought they'd been building together for their future. Empty, cleaned out, never existed. The way she thought. She ended up in a cramped studio apartment across town in a rough neighborhood, borrowing money from her elderly mother just to cover the first month's rent and deposit. The woman who'd walked out on me because I couldn't provide any more was now learning what rock bottom really felt like. And it was a long way down. Veronica's pride lasted about 2 months before harsh reality finally crushed it completely. She couldn't find any office work, her resume had too many gaps and outdated skills, and nobody wanted to hire someone in their 50s with no recent relevant experience in a competitive market. Desperate and running out of options, she applied to a domestic work agency that specialized in placing housekeepers and cleaners with wealthy clients who valued discretion. The pay was decent enough to survive on, the hours were flexible, and most importantly, it was completely anonymous. No one from her old life would ever know what she was doing or how far she'd fallen. The agency called her in for an interview, ran a background check that came back clean, and placed her with a client within a week. Quiet homeowner, the coordinator explained while going over the paperwork. Mid-50s, single. Keeps to himself mostly. Just needs someone 3 days a week for general cleaning and some light meal prep. Very low maintenance, shouldn't be any problems. Veronica accepted the position without asking any questions, without even asking for the client's name. She was in no position to be selective. She just needed the work desperately. She had no idea who she'd be working for. None at all. The first day, she arrived at the address just before 9 in the morning like the coordinator had instructed. The house was nicer than she expected, modest but extremely well kept. With clean lines and solid craftsmanship that reminded her of something but she couldn't quite place it. She knocked on the front door, her hands slightly shaky from nerves and too much coffee. It opened slowly after a moment. I stood there in the doorway, older than she remembered, leaner, sharper around the edges like I'd been carved from something harder. Clean shaven, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and faded jeans, work boots. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes, the slow crawl of recognition that hadn't quite landed yet, hadn't quite connected the dots. "You're here for the cleaning position?" I asked, my voice completely calm and even, like I was talking to a stranger. She blinked several times, then nodded quickly, and mumbled, "Yes. Yes, that's me." I stepped aside and held the door open wider. "Come in." She walked past me into the house, and I closed the door behind her quietly. She still didn't know. Not yet. But she would soon. The first week, Veronica worked in almost complete silence. I left her a detailed list of tasks. Each morning on the kitchen counter, dust the living room and dining area, vacuum all the bedrooms, wipe down the kitchen counters and appliances, clean the bathrooms thoroughly. She followed the instructions without question or complaint, moving through the house like a ghost, like she was trying to be invisible. I watched from a distance, not hovering over her. Just observing quietly. She was careful, thorough, clearly trying to prove she was worth keeping around. I stayed polite but completely detached emotionally. I'd leave notes for her on the counter with additional instructions, always signed HD at the bottom. She'd glance at them briefly, fold them neatly, and get back to work without comment. Sometimes I'd pass her in the hallway, and she'd step aside quickly, eyes down, making herself small. I never pushed for conversation. Never spoke more than absolutely necessary. I wanted her to settle in first. To get comfortable. To stop looking too closely at things. Because when the realization finally hit her like a freight train, I wanted it to hurt as much as possible. I'd waited a long time for this moment. One Thursday evening, I came home from a job site earlier than usual. I'd told Veronica the day before that I had clients coming over for dinner, and she'd agreed to prepare the meal as part of her duties. Nothing fancy or complicated, just grilled chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, and a simple garden salad. When I walked through the door, the table was set beautifully with my good dishes, the food was plated and arranged perfectly, steam still rising. She was wiping down the counter with her back to me, focused on her work. Smells good, I said casually, setting my keys down on the entry table with a metallic clink. She turned around quickly, startled by my voice, then smiled nervously. Thank you. I hope it's okay. I wasn't sure about the seasoning. I walked slowly to the dining table, inspected the setup carefully, and nodded with approval. You did well. Very well. There was something in the way I said it, cold, professional, like I was reviewing a contractor's work instead of thanking someone for cooking dinner. She hesitated, biting her lip slightly. You remind me of someone, she said quietly, almost to herself. I met her eyes directly. Do I? She looked away quickly. Maybe. I don't know. Sorry. The next morning, while cleaning my home office, Veronica found a photograph sitting on the desk in a simple frame. It was old, the edges worn and faded from being handled too many times over the years. In the picture, a younger version of me stood beside a younger version of her in front of a half-finished house, just the frame and some walls. Our very first build together. Her smile in the photo was wide and genuine, full of hope. My arm was around her shoulders protectively. We looked happy. We looked invincible. She picked up the frame with both hands, her breath catching audibly in her throat. Her fingers started trembling. The photograph slipped from her shaking hands and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, glass shattering. I appeared in the doorway a second later, drawn by the sound. She turned slowly to face me, her face completely drained of color, white as paper. Henry. She whispered, her voice breaking. Are you? I stepped into the room calmly. Hands in my pockets, and looked down at the broken frame. Then I looked back at her. Find something familiar? I asked quietly. She couldn't speak. Just stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Veronica's composure shattered completely like the glass on the floor. Words poured out of her in a frantic, broken stream, apologies, excuses, justifications, all tumbling over each other. She talked about the pressure she'd felt, the fear that had consumed her, the mistake she knew she'd made. She cried, hands shaking violently, mascara streaking down her face in dark lines. I stood there against the doorframe and listened in complete silence, my face Expressionless. When she finally ran out of words and breath, she looked up at me with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. "Henry, please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong about everything. Can't we talk about this? Can't we?" I held up one hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You can't rebuild what you demolished out of greed, Veronica." My voice was quiet but steady as stone. "You left me when I had nothing, when I needed you most. Because you thought love was something you could buy and sell like a commodity. You taught me what loyalty really costs. And now I finally know its exact price." She crumpled against the wall, sliding down to the floor, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I picked up the broken frame carefully, brushed off the glass, and walked out of the room, leaving her there alone. The next morning, I left an envelope on the kitchen counter with her final paycheck inside. Attached to it was a handwritten note on plain white paper, my handwriting clear and deliberate. "You taught me what loyalty costs. I finally know its price. Thank you for that lesson." When she found it hours later, she read it 3 times, then sat down on the kitchen floor and cried until her voice gave out completely and she couldn't make any sound at all. I wasn't there to see it happen. I'd already left for a job site across town before sunrise. Later that afternoon, she called the agency and told them in a broken voice that she couldn't return to that particular house, that she needed a different assignment immediately. They didn't ask why or push for details. By the time I got home that evening, her belongings were gone from the mudroom where she'd kept her spare shoes and jacket. The house felt quieter after that. Not empty or lonely. Just lighter. Like something heavy and toxic had finally been removed. After poisoning the air for too long, I could breathe easier. Word travels fast in small circles and tight-knit communities. Within 2 weeks, people in the old neighborhood started whispering behind hands and over fences. Veronica Dalton, the woman who used to host elaborate charity brunches and drive a luxury sedan, was now cleaning houses for a living. The mighty had fallen far. I heard about it from a former client who thought I'd want to know the gossip, thought it would make me feel vindicated. "People are talking," she said carefully, watching my reaction. "Does it bother you at all?" I thought about it for a moment, staring out the window. Then I shook my head. "No. Let them talk all they want." Veronica kept working through the agency after that, moving from house to house, barely scraping by on what she earned, taking whatever assignments they gave her. I never bad-mouthed her to anyone. Never told anyone the full story of what she'd done or how we'd ended up here. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was loud enough on its own, echoing through every conversation. And honestly, I didn't want revenge that required my voice. Silence was so much stronger. Silence let her sit with what she'd done without any distractions. 3 months later, HD Restorations was featured in the local newspaper in a full-page article with photos. The headline read in bold letters, "Henry Dalton, the builder who rose from bankruptcy to build a legacy." The article detailed my entire journey in surprising depth, losing everything in the crash, starting over from absolute zero, rebuilding quietly and carefully without fanfare or shortcuts. They called me resilient, humble, a man who'd turned complete failure into fuel for something better. The reporter had somehow found people I'd worked for, and they'd all said generous things. Veronica saw the article. I know this because a mutual friend told me later that she'd been sitting in a coffee shop when someone left the paper on the table next to her. She'd picked it up out of boredom, started reading, then frozen completely when she recognized my name and photo. She read the whole thing twice, then folded it very carefully and walked out of the coffee shop without finishing her drink or paying attention to anything around her. That's when it really hit her. The full scale of what I'd become, what I'd accomplished without her, what she'd walked away from. I hadn't just survived the fall. I'd climbed higher than before. And I'd done it without needing to humiliate her publicly or drag her name through the mud. The quiet success was the revenge. She finally understood that. And it was far too late to matter. Around that same time, I started donating a significant portion of my profits to a local housing charity that operated across the county. They helped people who were one paycheck away from homelessness, one emergency away from living in their cars, the kind of people I used to be not that long ago. I funded emergency repairs for families, paid overdue rent for people about to be evicted through no fault of their own, and sponsored a program that taught basic construction skills to anyone willing to learn a trade. I didn't do any of it for recognition, or tax breaks or publicity. I did it because I remembered exactly what it felt like to have nothing and no one willing to help or even acknowledge you exist. Edition. The charity director thanked me at a small ceremony in their office, gave a short speech about generosity. I shook her hand, said a few words about giving back, and left before they could take any photos or ask me to stay for the reception. I wasn't the man Veronica had left behind. I was better in ways that actually mattered. But I was also colder, harder, more guarded. Some wounds heal over with time, but the scar tissue changes you fundamentally. It changes how you see people, how much you trust, how much you're willing to risk. I was okay with that change. I had to be. 2 months after the newspaper article ran, Veronica was evicted from her studio apartment. She hadn't been able to keep up with rent for 3 months, and the landlord had finally run out of patience with promises and excuses. She showed up at my door on a rainy Saturday afternoon, no warning, just appeared there. She had a single battered suitcase in her hand, soaked through from the rain, shivering. I opened the door and looked at her without any surprise. I'd almost expected this moment. I didn't know where else to go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, broken and small. Everyone else said no. I stepped aside. Without a word. Come in. She hesitated on the threshold, like she thought it might be a trap. Then she walked past me into the warm house, dripping on the floor. I brought her a clean towel from the bathroom, made hot tea in the kitchen, and sat down across from her at the same kitchen table where she'd handed me divorce papers years ago. She didn't beg this time. Didn't make demands or excuses. She just looked tired. Completely broken. Used up. I let her stay the night in the guest room. Not because I still loved her or felt anything romantic. Not because I owed her anything after what she'd done. But because I wasn't the kind of man who left people out in the rain, even the ones who'd left me in much worse conditions. The next morning, we sat at the same kitchen table where she'd once slid divorce papers across to me like they meant nothing. She held her mug of coffee with both hands, staring down into the dark liquid like it held answers. I thought money defined love, she said. Quietly, finally breaking the silence. I thought if you couldn't provide at the level I wanted, you weren't worth staying for. I nodded slowly, wrapping my hands around my own mug. And I thought love could survive without respect or loyalty. I thought wanting to be together was enough. I was wrong too. She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen from crying. I'm sorry, Henry. For all of it. For everything I said and did. I believed her. I could hear the genuine regret in her voice. But it didn't change anything that had happened. I know you are, I said. But sorry doesn't rebuild what's gone. It just acknowledges the rubble and the damage. I stood up and walked to the counter, came back with an envelope. Cash inside. Enough to cover a deposit on a new place and first month's rent somewhere modest. This isn't charity. It's closure. Take it. She took it with trembling hands. Thank you. I looked at her one last time. You should go, Veronica. There's nothing left here. This time, she didn't argue or try to stay. She just nodded, picked up her suitcase, and walked out the door into the morning light. That evening, I sat alone in my living room as rain tapped steadily against the windows. The house was quiet, the kind of deep quiet I used to fear and avoid. But now it felt completely different. Peaceful. Whole. Right. I glanced at the empty chair across from me, the one Veronica used to sit in during better times, and felt nothing but relief. No anger. No bitterness. No what-ifs. She'd taught me what I didn't want to build my entire life on: status. Appearances, conditional love that evaporated under pressure. And in leaving when she did, she'd given me the space and motivation to become someone fundamentally stronger. I picked up my old notebook, the one I'd used to sketch my way out of rock bottom years ago, and flipped to a blank page near the back. I wrote one sentence at the top in careful letters: a man is measured by what he builds after everything falls. Then I closed the notebook, set it aside on the table, and smiled faintly to myself. The lights outside blurred through the rain. Streaked glass. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't bitter or angry. I was just whole. And that, I realized as I sat there in the quiet, was more than enough. It was everything.